The phone rang at 5:30 a.m., piercing the darkness of Jack Donovan's small apartment. His calloused hand fumbled across the nightstand, knocking over an empty coffee mug before finding the vibrating phone. The caller ID showed unknown, and Jack's first instinct was to ignore it. But in his line of work, a struggling mechanic with a garage perpetually on the brink of closing, unknown callers sometimes meant emergency repairs and much-needed cash. "Donovan Auto," he answered, his voice still thick with sleep. "Mr. Donovan? Jack Donovan?" The voice on the other end was crisp, professional, female. "Yes, that's me." Jack sat up, instantly more alert. Few people called him Mr. anymore. "I apologize for the early hour. I'm calling about an emergency escort job. $800 for approximately 6 hours of your time today. Are you available?" Jack's hand instinctively moved to his father's pocket watch on the nightstand. The metal was worn smooth from years of worry, the gold plating long since rubbed away to reveal the brass beneath. $800. That would cover Dylan's school fees with enough left over for groceries for the week. Maybe even a small dent in the electric bill that had been glaring at him from the kitchen counter. "Who is this? How did you get my number?" Jack asked, suspicion creeping into his voice. In his experience, offers that sounded too good to be true usually were. "My employer requires discretion. I can assure you this is a legitimate request. You come highly recommended for your reliability." The woman paused. "The job is simple. Escort a VIP client to a charity event and ensure their safety. You'd be required to wear formal attire. The Westbrook Hotel, penthouse suite, noon today." Jack glanced at his sleeping son through the half-open bedroom door. Dylan was curled up in his bed, dark hair falling across his forehead, looking so much like his mother that it still took Jack's breath away sometimes. 2 years since Claire's death, and the resemblance only grew stronger as Dylan approached his 9th birthday. "How did you know about my garage?" Jack pressed, uneasy about the caller's knowledge. "As I said, you come recommended. Will you accept the job, Mr. Donovan? My employer needs an answer now." Jack thought about the school administrator's sympathetic but firm email yesterday. Tuition was already 2 weeks late. Claire had insisted on the private school with its advanced math program, the perfect place for Dylan's remarkable abilities. Keeping him there had been Jack's final promise to her. "I'll be there," he said finally. "Excellent. Noon sharp, Mr. Donovan. Dress appropriately." The line went dead. Jack sat in the darkness, the phone still in his hand, wondering what he'd just agreed to. $800 for an escort job? It didn't make sense. But sense wasn't paying the bills these days. Morning sunlight filtered through the worn curtains as Jack made breakfast. Pancakes shaped like dinosaurs, Dylan's favorite. His sons sat at their small kitchen table, calculator in hand, working through math problems meant for children twice his age. "Dad, did you know that if you take any number, multiply it by 9, and add the digits of the result together, you always get 9? Dylan looked up, his blue eyes, Claire's eyes, bright with excitement. "Is that right?" Jack flipped a triceratops-shaped pancake onto Dylan's plate. "Show me." Dylan scribbled on his paper. "Take 54, multiply by 9, you get 486. Then 4 plus 8 plus 6 equals 18, and 1 plus 8 equals 9. He beamed triumphantly. Jack ruffled his son's hair. "That's amazing, buddy. You're getting too smart for me. Mom used to say math is like a secret language. Once you learn it, you can read the universe." Dylan's smile faltered slightly, as it always did when he mentioned Claire. Jack swallowed hard. She was right about that. She was right about a lot of things. He turned back to the stove, blinking rapidly. "Listen, I've got a special job today. Mrs. Peterson from next door will pick you up from school and watch you until I get back, okay?" Dylan nodded, already back to his calculations. Jack watched him for a moment, this small person who somehow kept going, despite everything they'd lost. Claire had been diagnosed with stage 4 cancer just 3 months after Dylan's 6th birthday. 11 months later, she was gone, leaving Jack with a devastated child, a mountain of medical debt, and a promise to give their son the education she had valued so highly. Jack worked 3 jobs now: the garage he'd inherited from his father, weekend shifts at the local hardware store, and occasional home repair work for elderly neighbors who couldn't afford professional contractors. He'd sold their house to pay off Claire's medical bills, moving them into this small apartment above the garage. Every penny went to keeping Dylan in that school, to preserving some part of the future Claire had envisioned for their son. The black suit hung in Jack's closet like a ghost. The same suit he'd worn to Claire's funeral 2 years ago, and rarely since. He'd lost weight since then, and the jacket hung loosely from his shoulders as he fastened the buttons. The dress shirt beneath it had yellowed slightly at the collar, but it was clean and pressed. It would have to do. Dylan had already left for school, with strict instructions to behave for Mrs. Peterson and to finish his homework before turning on the TV. Jack checked his reflection in the bathroom mirror, barely recognizing the man who stared back. At 38, his face had weathered like leather left in the sun. Dark hair cropped short, the first touches of gray at his temples. Eyes that had once crinkled easily with laughter now seemed permanently shadowed. Claire used to tease him about his perpetually oil-stained hands, but today he'd scrubbed them raw, forcing the ingrained motor oil from the creases of his knuckles. The Westbrook Hotel towered over the downtown skyline, a gleaming spire of glass and steel that seemed to belong to a different world than Jack's garage. The doorman gave him a skeptical look as he approached, taking in the too large suit and scuffed dress shoes. "I'm here for a client in the penthouse," Jack said, feeling out of place and irritated by it. The doorman's expression didn't change, but he picked up his phone and murmured something. After a moment, he nodded. "They're expecting you, sir. Express elevator, key card required." He handed Jack a sleek black card, penthouse level. The elevator was mirrored on all sides, forcing Jack to confront his reflection from every angle. He straightened his tie, wishing he had thought to get a haircut. Too late now. The penthouse door opened before he could knock. A woman stood there, perhaps in her mid-30s, studying him with an intensity that made him want to check if he had something stuck in his teeth. She wore a simple gray dress that somehow managed to look more expensive than anything Jack had seen in department store windows. Her dark hair was pulled back in a sleek knot, emphasizing high cheekbones and sharp, intelligent eyes. "Mr. Donovan," she said, and Jack recognized the crisp voice from the phone. "Please come in." The penthouse stretched behind her like a museum of wealth he'd never touch. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city. Crystal chandeliers caught the midday light and scattered it across polished marble floors. The furniture looked like it had never been sat on, arranged for appearance rather than comfort. The woman gestured for him to follow her into what appeared to be a living room. "My name is Eleanor Reed. I'll be your client today." Jack frowned. The caller mentioned escorting a VIP. I assumed I'd be working security for someone else. Eleanor's lips curved slightly. "You are escorting a VIP, Mr. Donovan." "Me." She moved closer, close enough that he caught the scent of her perfume mixing with the scent of his own nervous sweat. "But what you don't know is that I've been testing your strength in ways you can't imagine." Jack's throat went dry. Testing his strength? He'd fixed transmissions with his bare hands, worked 3 jobs to keep food on the table, held his son while they both cried over Claire's empty chair. But this woman spoke like she'd witnessed something he couldn't remember doing. "I don't understand," he said finally. "You don't need to. Not yet." Her fingers drummed against the marble countertop, manicured nails clicking a rhythm that matched his racing heartbeat. "You're here to escort me to the Oak Ridge Charity Gala this evening. I need someone who looks capable, someone who won't attract attention but can handle trouble if it arises." "What kind of trouble are you expecting at a charity event?" Eleanor shrugged one elegant shoulder. "Probably none, but in my position, it pays to be cautious." She glanced at her watch, a slim, silver thing that probably cost more than Jack's entire garage. "We have a few hours before the event. I've arranged for a proper suit to be delivered for you." Jack stiffened. What's wrong with this suit? Something flickered across Eleanor's face. Amusement, perhaps, or pity. Neither option improved Jack's mood. "Nothing at all," she said smoothly, "but the event calls for black tie, and you'll be more comfortable in something that fits properly." Before Jack could respond, the penthouse doorbell chimed. Eleanor disappeared and returned moments later with a garment bag, which she handed to him. "The bathroom is through there. Everything should be your size." Jack wanted to ask how she knew his size, but the question died in his throat. $800, he reminded himself. Just get through the evening. The suit inside the garment bag was unlike anything Jack had ever worn. The fabric felt butter soft against his skin, the cut somehow managing to disguise the fact that he'd lost muscle mass in the past 2 years. When he emerged from the bathroom, Eleanor gave him an appraising look. "Much better," she said. "You clean up quite well, Mr. Donovan." "Jack," he corrected her, uncomfortable with the formality. "Just Jack." "Jack," she repeated, testing the name. "Well then, Jack, shall we go? My driver is waiting." The driver turned out to be a uniformed chauffeur with a sleek black town car. Jack felt ridiculous at being driven around like this, but Eleanor seemed perfectly at ease in the back seat, scrolling through emails on her phone. Occasionally, she would look up and catch him watching her, those sharp eyes seeming to catalog his every expression. "Tell me about yourself, Jack," she said suddenly, setting her phone aside. "Not much to tell," he replied, staring out the window as the city gave way to the manicured landscapes of the wealthy suburbs. "I'm a mechanic. I fix cars." "And raise a son on your own," Eleanor added casually. Jack's head snapped around. "How do you know about my son? Is it a secret?" "No, but it's not something I advertised either." Jack frowned. "Did your sources that recommended me also give you my life story?" Eleanor regarded him steadily. "You're suspicious by nature. That's probably a good quality in a father." "You didn't answer my question." "No, I didn't." She smiled, a small, enigmatic curve of her lips. "Tell me about your son. His name is Dylan, isn't it?" The fact that she knew his son's name sent a chill through Jack, but he fought to keep his expression neutral. "He's 8, turns 9 next month. And he attends Westbrook Academy? That's an excellent school." Now Jack was truly alarmed. "Look, I don't know who you are or why you're so interested in my family, but—" "I'm not a threat to you or your son, Jack," Eleanor interrupted, her voice suddenly gentle. "Quite the opposite, in fact. You'll understand soon enough." The conversation died after that, with Jack too unsettled to ask more questions and Eleanor seemingly content with silence. By the time they arrived at the gala venue, a sprawling estate that belonged in a period film rather than modern reality, Jack was a bundle of nerves beneath his borrowed finery. The driver opened Eleanor's door first, then Jack's. As they approached the entrance, Eleanor placed her hand lightly on Jack's arm. "Remember, you're here as my escort. Stay close, observe everything, say little." Jack nodded, falling into step beside her. Whatever game this woman was playing, he'd see it through for the promised payment. $800 bought a lot of compliance from a desperate man. The gala venue sprawled across manicured lawns 30 minutes outside town, a sprawling estate that belonged in magazines Jack would never buy. Luxury cars lined the circular driveway like expensive jewelry displayed in a store window. Jack felt like a wolf among peacocks as he escorted Eleanor up the grand staircase and into the ballroom. Inside, wealth and privilege swirled around them like perfumed smoke. Men in $1,000 suits discussed stock options over champagne that sparkled like liquid diamonds. Women dripped in jewelry that could have bought Jack's garage 10 times over. But Eleanor navigated through the crowd with the ease of someone who belonged, stopping to exchange pleasantries with people who clearly knew her well. More than knew her, they deferred to her. A silver-haired man in a navy suit bowed slightly when she approached. "Ms. Reed, a pleasure as always. Your contribution to the Children's Fund was most generous." "Edward," Eleanor nodded. "I believe in investing in the future." Her hand remained firmly on Jack's arm as she made introductions. "This is Jack Donovan, my escort for the evening." The man barely glanced at Jack before returning his attention to Eleanor. "The board was hoping you might reconsider our proposal. Westbrook Industries would benefit greatly from your expertise." "My decision stands, Edward, but I appreciate the continued interest." Eleanor's tone was polite but final, and the man retreated with a forced smile. Throughout the evening, Jack watched their interactions with growing curiosity. Everyone seemed to know Eleanor, to respect her position, whatever that was. She moved through the crowd like royalty granting audience to subjects, gracious but always slightly removed. The charity auction began with items that made Jack's head spin. A week in Paris, a vintage wine collection, a painting by someone whose name everyone seemed to recognize but him. Eleanor bid on several items with casual flicks of her wrist, numbers flying from her lips like loose change. 20,000, 50,000. When she pledged $100,000 to the Children's Education Fund, she signed the check without hesitation, a pen moving with the confidence of someone who wrote large numbers regularly. Jack caught a glimpse of the signature, elegant script that somehow looked familiar. His father's pocket watch, which he transferred to the pocket of the borrowed suit, seemed to grow heavier against his chest as puzzle pieces shifted in his mind, not quite forming a complete picture, but suggesting shapes he wasn't ready to acknowledge. As the evening wore on, Jack found himself wondering about the woman beside him. Who was Eleanor Reed really? Why had she chosen him of all people to accompany her tonight? And why did she keep looking at him with that mixture of curiosity and something else, something that looked almost like expectation? During a lull in the proceedings, Eleanor excused herself to speak with another guest. Jack took the opportunity to step outside onto a terrace, grateful for the cool night air after the stuffiness of the ballroom. He pulled out his phone, checking for messages from Mrs. Peterson about Dylan. Nothing. He was about to call when a voice behind him made him jump. "Your son is fine, Jack," Mrs. Peterson reports he finished his homework and is now beating her at chess. Jack spun around to find Eleanor watching him, a champagne flute in her hand. "How do you know that? Did you call her?" "I have my methods." Eleanor moved to stand beside him at the balustrade, looking out over the moonlit gardens below. "He's quite gifted at mathematics, isn't he? His teachers say he could be working at a high school level already if given the right opportunities." "How could you possibly know what his teachers say?" Jack demanded, his patience finally snapping. "Who are you, really? And why are you so interested in my son?" Eleanor took a sip of champagne before answering. "Who I am is complicated. Why I'm interested in your son, and in you, is even more so." She turned to face him fully. "Tell me about Claire." The sound of his late wife's name on the stranger's lips hit Jack like a physical blow. "That's none of your business," he said coldly. "She was a mathematician, wasn't she? Before she became ill. She recognized Dylan's gift because she shared it." Jack stared at Eleanor, truly alarmed now. "How do you know these things?" Claire was brilliant. Her paper on applied number theory was groundbreaking. She could have had a distinguished academic career. Eleanor's voice was soft, almost reverent. "Instead, she chose to focus on raising your son." "Stop talking about my wife like you knew her," Jack growled. "But I did know her, Jack. Not personally, but by reputation. In certain circles, Claire Donovan was considered a significant loss to the field of mathematics." Eleanor's gaze was steady. "What would she think of you now, working yourself to death to keep your promises to her?" Jack took a step back, feeling suddenly exposed, as if this woman had somehow peered directly into his soul. "I think it's time for us to leave." "Of course." Eleanor didn't press the issue, merely nodded and turned toward the ballroom. "I've accomplished what I came for tonight." The ride back to the city passed in tense silence. Jack stared out the window, mind racing with the questions he wasn't sure he wanted answered. Eleanor seemed content to let him stew, occasionally glancing in his direction with that same inscrutable expression. When the car pulled up in front of Jack's garage, Eleanor finally spoke. "Your payment will be transferred to your account by morning. Thank you for your services tonight." Jack nodded stiffly, already reaching for the door handle. "Jack," Eleanor said, stopping him, "Dylan's birthday is in 3 weeks. What does he want most?" The question was so unexpected that Jack answered without thinking. "A real baseball glove. The good kind that the kids with money have." He immediately regretted the admission, hating the hint of bitterness in his voice. Eleanor nodded as if he'd confirmed something she already knew. "Good night, Jack Donovan. I suspect we'll be seeing each other again soon." Jack climbed out of the car without responding, watching as the sleek black vehicle disappeared into the night. Only then did he realize he was still wearing the borrowed suit. Swearing under his breath, he climbed the stairs to the apartment, trying to shake the feeling that his life had somehow veered off course tonight, heading toward a destination he couldn't see. Mrs. Peterson was dozing on the couch when Jack entered. She startled awake, then blinked owlishly at his attire. "My goodness, Jack, don't you look handsome, like something out of a movie." "Thanks for watching Dylan," Jack said, reaching for his wallet. "Let me pay you for your time." The older woman waved him off. "No need. That nice lady already took care of it." Jack froze. "What nice lady?" The Chinese who called about the job. She transferred money to my account this afternoon. Far too much, really, but she insisted. Mrs. Peterson gathered her cardigan. Dylan's asleep. He was worried when you weren't home at the usual time, but I told him you had an important job. He was so proud of his daddy, working hard. After Mrs. Peterson left, Jack checked on Dylan, who was indeed fast asleep, a math book open on the bed beside him. Jack carefully removed the book, marked the binding, and set it on the nightstand. For a long moment, he simply watched his son breathe, the steady rise and fall of his chest a reminder of everything Jack had to protect in this world. 3 days passed without incident. Jack threw himself into his work at the garage, trying to forget the strange evening with Eleanor Reed. He had received the promised payment, $800 transferred directly to his account. No explanation, no note. He'd used it to pay Dylan's school fees and buy groceries, pushing aside his unease about the source of the money. On the fourth day, everything changed. Jack was elbow-deep in the engine of a temperamental Ford when he heard the purr of an expensive vehicle pulling into the garage. He looked up to see a sleek Audi stop just inside the entrance. The driver's door opened, and Eleanor Reed stepped out, dressed casually in jeans and a simple sweater that somehow still managed to look more expensive than anything in Jack's entire wardrobe. "Your timing belt is making a strange noise," she announced without preamble, as if their last meeting hadn't ended in tense silence. Jack wiped his hands on a rag, leaving smears of grease. "There's nothing wrong with your car," he said flatly. "I can hear it running perfectly from here." Eleanor smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her face from merely beautiful to radiant. "Perhaps I'm just being cautious. My father always said regular maintenance prevents costly repairs down the road." "There are a dozen luxury dealerships with service departments in the city," Jack pointed out. "Why bring it here?" "Because I trust your work." She leaned against the car, casual in a way she hadn't been at the gala. "And because I wanted to see you again." Jack crossed his arms. "Why all? Direct, aren't you? I appreciate that." Eleanor glanced around the garage, taking in the worn equipment, the concrete floor stained with decades of oil spills. "Would you humor me and at least check the car? I'll pay your regular rate, of course." Jack sighed, recognizing a losing battle. "Pull it into Bay 3. I'll get to it after I finish this Ford." To his surprise, Eleanor didn't leave the car with him and depart as most customers would. Instead, she settled into the worn chair in the small waiting area, pulling out a tablet from her bag. For the next hour, she worked quietly while Jack finished the Ford and then moved on to her Audi. As he suspected, there was nothing wrong with her car. The timing belt was in perfect condition, the oil recently changed, every fluid at the proper level. Jack found himself performing increasingly obscure checks just to justify the time spent on the vehicle. "Everything's fine," he said finally, closing the hood. "Your car is in perfect condition." Eleanor looked up from her tablet. "I'm relieved to hear it. What do I owe you?" "Nothing," Jack shook his head. "I didn't do anything. You took the time to check it thoroughly. That's worth something." She set her tablet aside. "Jack, Whatever she was about to say was interrupted by the arrival of Dylan, who burst into the garage with the energy only an 8-year-old could muster after a full day of school. "Dad, Mrs. Wilson gave me an A+ on my math project and said I should consider entering the regional competition." He skidded to a halt when he noticed Eleanor. "Oh, hello." "Hello," Eleanor replied, her voice softer than Jack had ever heard it. "You must be Dylan." "I'm Eleanor Reed." Dylan looked to his father for guidance. Jack nodded slightly, and the boy stepped forward, extending his hand with the careful manners Claire had instilled in him from an early age. "Nice to meet you, Ms. Reed." "Please, call me Eleanor." She shook his hand solemnly. "Your father was just checking my car for me. He says it's in perfect condition." "Dad's the best mechanic in the whole city," Dylan said loyally. "He can fix anything." "I believe that," Eleanor smiled. "I hear you're quite talented at mathematics. What's your project about?" Jack expected Dylan to retreat into the shyness he usually displayed with strangers. To his amazement, his son launched into an enthusiastic explanation of his project, something about probability and game theory that Jack couldn't quite follow. What was even more surprising was that Eleanor not only understood, but engaged with Dylan on his level, asking questions that made the boy's eyes light up with excitement. "That's a fascinating approach," she said when Dylan paused for breath. Have you considered applying a Bayesian model to account for the conditional probabilities? Dylan's face scrunched in concentration. I don't think I know what that is. It's a way of updating probabilities based on new information, Eleanor explained. She grabbed a notepad from the counter and quickly sketched out a diagram. See, if you start with this assumption and then add new data here. Jack watched in astonishment as his son and this mysterious woman bent their heads over the notepad, deep in discussion about mathematical concepts he barely recognized. Eleanor spoke to Dylan not as an adult humoring a child, but as one mathematician to another, respecting his intelligence while gently expanding his understanding. Before Jack knew it, an hour had passed, and Dylan was asking if Eleanor could help him refine his project for the competition. Jack opened his mouth to intervene. This woman was still essentially a stranger, despite the odd connection she seemed determined to forge. But Eleanor spoke first. I'd be honored to help, but only if your father approves. She looked at Jack, a question in her eyes. Dylan turned to him with a pleading expression. Please, Dad? Eleanor knows all about advanced probability, and she said my approach is innovative but needs refinement, and she can help me make it competition. Ready. Jack hesitated, torn between caution and the desire to support his son's obvious enthusiasm. I don't know, buddy. Ms. Reed probably has a busy schedule and... I can make time, Eleanor said quietly. I'd consider it a privilege to work with a young mind like Dylan's. There was something in her expression, a sincerity that cut through Jack's defenses. Despite his reservations, he found himself nodding. All right, but homework and regular school assignments come first. Dylan whooped with joy, then immediately began bombarding Eleanor with questions about when they could start and what books he should read in preparation. She answered patiently, writing down titles and concepts for him to explore. As the afternoon light faded to evening, Jack reluctantly interrupted their discussion. Dylan, it's getting late. Time to head upstairs for dinner. Can Eleanor stay for dinner? Dylan asked immediately. Please? Jack glanced at Eleanor, expecting her to make a polite excuse. Instead, she looked almost vulnerable, as if the invitation meant more to her than it should. I wouldn't want to impose, she said carefully. It's just spaghetti, Jack warned. Nothing fancy. Spaghetti sounds perfect. Eleanor gathered her tablet and bag. If you're sure it's no trouble. And so Jack found himself preparing dinner for 3 instead of 2, hyper-aware of Eleanor's presence at their small kitchen table as she continued to discuss math with Dylan. The apartment suddenly felt both too small and somehow warmer with her in it. Jack couldn't remember the last time they had had a guest for dinner. Since Claire's death, he'd kept their social circle small, protective. During the meal, Eleanor seamlessly shifted the conversation to include Jack, asking about the garage, how long he'd been a mechanic, whether he'd always wanted to work with cars. Her questions were genuine, not the polite small talk of someone merely being courteous. My father was a mechanic, Jack found himself explaining. He taught me everything I know. The garage was his, passed down to me when he died 5 years ago. You must have been close, Eleanor observed. We were after my mother left. It was just the 2 of us for most of my childhood. Jack twirled spaghetti around his fork. He used to say there's no problem that can't be fixed if you have the right tools and enough patience. A wise philosophy for life as well as cars, Eleanor said softly. After dinner, Dylan insisted on showing Eleanor his collection of math books and the small trophy he'd won in last year's school competition. Jack used the opportunity to clear the table and wash dishes, listening to their voices from the next room. Dylan's excited chatter punctuated by Eleanor's thoughtful responses. When it was time for her to leave, Dylan hugged her goodbye, a gesture that startled both adults. Jack couldn't remember the last time his son had initiated physical contact with anyone outside their immediate family. The boy had been cautious around adults since Claire's death, building walls that even Jack struggled to penetrate sometimes. But something about Eleanor's genuine interest, her patient explanations, her way of treating Dylan like a person rather than a child, had earned his trust. As Jack watched them together, he saw something he'd forgotten could exist. A family dynamic that felt natural, unforced. Right. The realization scared him more than any engine problem he'd ever faced. Letting someone into their carefully constructed world meant risking the devastation that came when that person left. And people always left, one way or another. At the door, Eleanor turned to Jack. Thank you for dinner. and for letting me spend time with Dylan. He's extraordinary." "He is," Jack agreed, pride momentarily overriding his caution. "He gets that from his mother." "And from you," Eleanor said firmly. "Intelligence takes many forms, Jack. Don't sell yourself short." She reached out and squeezed his arm gently, the brief contact sending an unexpected warmth through him. Then she was gone, the sound of the Audi's engine fading into the night. Jack closed the door, leaning his forehead against the cool wood for a moment. What was happening here? Who was this woman who had inserted herself into their lives with such ease? And why couldn't he bring himself to send her away? In the days that followed, Eleanor became a regular presence at the garage. She would arrive in the late afternoon, ostensibly with minor car issues that required Jack's attention, but they both knew the real purpose of her visits was to work with Dylan on his math project. Jack found himself looking forward to her arrivals, watching the clock as the day progressed, anticipating the moment when her car would pull into the garage. She never arrived empty-handed, bringing books for Dylan, coffee for Jack, occasionally dinner for all three of them when she sensed he was too tired to cook. Her generosity was understated but constant, never making Jack feel like a charity case, always framed as practical assistance between friends. Friends. Was that what they were becoming? Jack wasn't sure. There was still too much he didn't know about Eleanor Reed, where she lived, what she did for a living, why she had singled out his family for her attention. But he couldn't deny the positive effect she was having on Dylan. His son was flourishing under her guidance, his natural mathematical abilities spanning in ways that his school teachers, however well-intentioned, couldn't facilitate. And if Jack was honest with himself, Eleanor was having an effect on him too. She listened when he spoke about Claire, without offering empty platitudes or advice, simply holding space for his grief while refusing to be intimidated by it. She talked about her own losses, a father who worked too much, a mother who left too early, the weight of expectations that threatened to crush anyone who tried to carry them alone. Their conversations revealed matching scars, different in origin but similar in depth. Two people who understood that life could break you in ways that left you simultaneously stronger and more fragile. The first time Dylan fell asleep on the couch while they were talking, Jack found himself sharing stories about Claire without the sharp edge of grief that usually accompanied her memory. He told Eleanor about their first date, a disaster at a fancy restaurant where Jack had tried too hard to impress the brilliant math major who'd somehow agreed to go out with him. "I spilled wine all over the tablecloth, knocked over a candle, and nearly set the place on fire," he admitted, smiling at the memory. "Claire laughed so hard she snorted, which made me feel better about the whole thing. Then she suggested we leave before we got banned for life and go get burgers instead." "She sounds wonderful," Eleanor said, her eyes warm in the dim light of the apartment. "She was. The smartest person I've ever known, but never made anyone feel less for not understanding what came so easily to her." Jack glanced at his sleeping son. "Dylan is so much like her. Not just the math, but the way he sees the world. Patterns and connections everywhere." "He has your heart, though," Eleanor observed quietly. "Your determination, your loyalty." Jack looked at her, surprised by the assessment. "You hardly know me." "I know enough." Eleanor's gaze was steady. "I know you've kept every promise you made to Claire, no matter the cost to yourself. I know you put Dylan's needs above your own without hesitation. I know you're the kind of man who fixes things, not just cars, but people, situations, problems." "You make me sound better than I am," Jack said uncomfortably. "No, I see you clearly, Jack Donovan." Eleanor stood, gathering her things. "It's getting late. I should go." Jack walked her to the door, as he always did. This time, however, Eleanor paused before leaving. "Dylan's birthday is next week," she said. "Would it be all right if I got him something?" "Nothing extravagant," she added quickly, seeing his expression. "Just a book or two I think he'd enjoy." Jack wanted to refuse, to maintain some boundary between this woman and their lives, but found he couldn't, not when she had already given Dylan so much that had nothing to do with material gifts. "That would be fine," he said finally. "He'd like that." Eleanor smiled, that radiant expression that transformed her face. "Good night, Jack." "Good night, Eleanor." As he closed the door behind her, Jack realized with a start that he was falling for this mysterious woman who had walked into their lives without warning. The thought terrified him, not just because of the secret she still kept, or the obvious differences in their circumstances, but because loving someone meant making yourself vulnerable to loss again. And Jack wasn't sure his heart could survive another breaking. Dylan's ninth birthday approached like a storm cloud on Jack's horizon. Previous celebrations had been modest affairs, limited by budget constraints and his own emotional capacity for joy. But this year felt different. Dylan had been dropping hints about a baseball glove for weeks, his eyes lighting up whenever they passed the sporting goods store window. Jack had been saving every spare dollar, but the numbers still fell short of the price tag attached to quality equipment. The gap between what he could provide and what his son deserved felt like a canyon he couldn't bridge. Pride warred with desperation as he considered asking Eleanor for help, knowing she had the means, but terrified of what that request might cost him in terms of dignity and independence. Eleanor solved his dilemma before he could voice it. She arrived at the garage 3 days before Dylan's birthday with a proposal that caught Jack off guard. Her company was sponsoring a youth baseball league and needed someone to teach basic automotive skills to teenagers interested in mechanics. The pay would be generous, enough to cover the glove and the birthday party Dylan had been dreaming about. "Your company," Jack repeated, leaning against a workbench. "You've never actually told me what you do, Eleanor." "I'm in management," she said vaguely. "Business administration primarily. And this company of yours just happens to need an auto mechanic to teach teenagers right when I need extra cash for Dylan's birthday?" Jack raised an eyebrow, skepticism evident in his tone. Eleanor met his gaze without flinching. "The need is genuine. The timing is fortunate. Does it matter?" It did matter, but Jack couldn't bring himself to refuse, not when the alternative was disappointing his son on his birthday. "When would I start?" "Next week. 2 evenings a week, 3 hours per session." Eleanor handed him a folder with details. "The first payment can be advanced immediately if you accept." Jack took the folder, knowing he was crossing some invisible line by accepting her help, but unable to see another option. "I accept. Thank you." Eleanor nodded as if she'd expected nothing less. "Dylan's going to love his birthday," she said softly. "You're a good father, Jack." The birthday party exceeded every expectation. With Eleanor's help, Jack transformed the garage into a baseball-themed celebration space. She arrived early to hang decorations and set up games that kept a dozen 9-year-olds entertained for hours. She produced a cake that looked professionally made, decorated with Dylan's favorite baseball team's logo in perfect detail. When Dylan opened his gift and found the baseball glove he'd been coveting, his shriek of joy echoed through the garage like music. But it was the second gift that stopped Jack's heart, a framed photograph of him and Dylan working on a car together, captured from an angle that suggested the photographer had been watching them for some time. The image showed them in their natural element, focused and content, a father teaching his son the skills that would serve him throughout life. Jack's hands trembled as he held the frame, recognizing the love and attention to detail that had gone into creating this moment of permanence. He looked up to find Eleanor watching him, her expression a mixture of hope and uncertainty. That night, after Dylan had fallen asleep clutching his new glove, Jack confronted Eleanor about the photograph. They stood in the small kitchen, voices low to avoid waking Dylan. "How long have you been watching us?" Jack asked, placing the framed photo on the counter between them. "Why are you documenting our lives without permission?" Eleanor's explanation came wrapped in words that felt carefully chosen, rehearsed. "I was moved by your relationship," she said. "The way you pour everything into being the father Dylan needs. It inspired me. Photography is a hobby of mine, a way of preserving moments that might otherwise be lost to time." But her eyes avoided his while she spoke, and Jack noticed the way her fingers drummed against her thigh, a nervous tick he'd observed before when she was hiding something. The explanations felt true but incomplete, like puzzle pieces that fit but left gaping holes in the bigger picture. "There's more to it than that," Jack pressed. "You've been in our lives for weeks now, Eleanor. You know almost everything about us. But I still know next to nothing about you. Who are you really? What do you want from us?" Eleanor's composure cracked slightly, a flicker of vulnerability crossing her face. "What I want," she began, then stopped, seeming to reconsider her words. I'm not here to hurt you or Dylan. I hope you believe that, at least. I do, Jack admitted. But that doesn't answer my question. No, it doesn't, Eleanor sighed. I'm not ready to explain everything, Jack. Not yet. Can you, can you trust me a little longer? Jack studied her face, searching for any sign of deception. What he saw instead was a deep well of loneliness that matched his own, a person who had built walls to protect themselves from a world that had caused them pain. Despite his reservations, he found himself nodding. A little longer, he agreed, but not indefinitely, Eleanor. We've had enough mystery in our lives. She smiled faintly. Thank you. After a moment's hesitation, she reached out and squeezed his hand, a brief contact that left his skin tingling. Good night, Jack. As he watched her leave, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something important, a key piece of the puzzle that would make sense of Eleanor Reed's presence in their lives. Whatever her secrets, he was beginning to believe they weren't malicious. But that didn't make them any less concerning. The coming weeks would reveal truths that would test everything Jack thought he knew about Eleanor, about himself, and about the possibilities for a future he'd stopped believing in when Claire died. The journey ahead would not be easy, but as his father's pocket watch ticked steadily in his pocket, Jack found himself hoping, for the first time in years, that time might be on his side after all. As Eleanor's visits to the garage became routine, Jack found himself increasingly drawn to her presence. The anticipation he felt waiting for her car to pull in each afternoon surprised him, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. Each visit brought something new, advanced math books that made Dylan's eyes light up, a special blend of coffee Jack had mentioned liking once, or occasionally dinner when she noticed him looking particularly tired. What impressed Jack most wasn't the gifts themselves, but how Eleanor offered them. Never as charity, always as something natural between friends, understanding his pride while respecting his struggles, friends. Was that what they were becoming? Jack wasn't sure. There was still too much he didn't know about Eleanor Reed, where she lived, what she did for a living, why she had singled out his family for her attention. But he couldn't deny the positive effect she was having on Dylan. His son was flourishing under her guidance, his natural mathematical abilities expanding in ways that his school teachers, however well-intentioned, couldn't facilitate. And if Jack was honest with himself, Eleanor was having an effect on him too. She listened when he spoke about Claire, without offering empty platitudes or advice, simply holding space for his grief while refusing to be intimidated by it. She talked about her own losses, a father who worked too much, a mother who left too early, the weight of expectations that threatened to crush anyone who tried to carry them alone. Their conversations revealed matching scars, different in origin but similar in depth. Two people who understood that life could break you in ways that left you simultaneously stronger and more fragile. One evening, as rain pounded against the garage's metal roof, Jack found himself sharing the details of Claire's illness, something he rarely discussed with anyone. Eleanor sat across from him in the garage's small office, a cup of coffee warming her hands, listening with an intensity that made it impossible to hold back. It was so fast, Jack said, staring at the rain-streaked window. One day she was helping Dylan with his homework. The next she was in the hospital with a diagnosis no one expected. Stage 4, already spread to her liver and bones. He swallowed hard. They gave her a year, maybe. She got 11 months. I'm so sorry, Jack, Eleanor said softly. Not the reflexive sympathy of someone uncomfortable with grief, but the genuine compassion of someone who understood loss. The hardest part was watching her struggle with leaving Dylan. She had so many plans for him, so many things she wanted to teach him. Jack's voice caught. Near the end, she made me promise to keep him in that school, to make sure his mind was challenged. It was the last thing she asked of me. And you've kept that promise, no matter the cost to yourself, Eleanor observed. That takes extraordinary strength. Jack shook his head. Not strength, just necessity. What else could I do? She trusted me to give him the future she wouldn't see. Many men would have found it easier to make excuses, to change schools, to take the path of least resistance. Eleanor leaned forward slightly. Don't diminish what you've done, Jack. Claire knew exactly who she was entrusting her son to. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the rain. Finally, Eleanor spoke again, her voice hesitant in a way Jack had never heard before. "My mother left when I was 8, she said, setting her coffee cup aside. "Not through death, but choice. She decided the life my father had built wasn't what she wanted after all. One morning I woke up and she was gone. A note on the kitchen counter explained that she needed to find herself, whatever that meant to a child who just wanted her mother back." Jack watched her face, seeing the shadow of old pain there. That's a different kind of loss, but no less devastating. "My father, he didn't know how to handle it. He was brilliant with business, with numbers, with systems. But emotions? Those were foreign territory." Eleanor's fingers traced the edge of the desk, a nervous gesture Jack had noticed before. "He buried himself in work, built his company into an empire, and left me in the care of a series of nannies and boarding schools." "I'm sorry," Jack said, echoing her earlier words. "No child should grow up feeling abandoned." Eleanor smiled faintly. "The irony is that he thought he was doing the right thing, providing for me materially, ensuring I had every advantage, every opportunity. What he didn't understand was that all I wanted was his time, his attention." "Did you ever tell him that?" "Once, when I was 16, I tried. He responded by buying me a car." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. That was his solution to everything: throw money at the problem until it went away. Or at least until it stopped complaining. Jack saw something in her expression then, a vulnerability that made his heart ache. This woman who moved through the world with such confidence, who wrote checks for $100,000 without blinking, had once been a lonely child yearning for connection. "What happened to him?" Jack asked. "Heart attack, 4 years ago. He was alone in his office, working late as usual." Eleanor's voice was steady, but her eyes held a deep sadness. By the time anyone found him, it was too late. "I'm sorry," Jack said again, feeling the inadequacy of the words. "The last thing he said to me the day before he died was that he was proud of what I'd accomplished at the company." Eleanor looked up, meeting Jack's gaze. "Not that he loved me or that he wished we had had more time together, just professional approval, as if I were an employee who'd exceeded expectations." The rain had intensified, drumming against the roof like impatient fingers. Jack found himself wanting to reach across the desk, to take her hand, to offer some tangible comfort. Before he could move, the office door burst open and Dylan appeared, wrapped in a raincoat too large for his small frame. "Dad, Eleanor, look what I found." He brandished a soggy piece of paper. "I was working on the probability calculations you showed me, and I think I found a pattern. Can we go upstairs and work on it?" Eleanor's expression shifted instantly, the vulnerability replaced by genuine interest. "Absolutely," she said, standing. "Let's take a look at what you've discovered." As they headed upstairs to the apartment, Jack watched them together, his son bubbling with excitement, and this enigmatic woman who had somehow breached the walls they'd built around themselves. For a moment, he allowed himself to imagine a future where evenings like this were the norm rather than the exception. The thought both thrilled and terrified him. Over the following weeks, Eleanor's presence in their lives became increasingly seamless. She would arrive at the garage after Dylan's school day, sometimes bringing dinner, other times joining them for Jack's simple meals. On weekends, she took Dylan to museums and math competitions, always with Jack's permission, always returning with a boy whose eyes shone with new knowledge and experiences. Jack found himself wondering less about her motives and more about her absence when she wasn't there. The garage felt emptier somehow, the apartment quieter. Dylan would ask when she was coming back, and Jack would pretend not to count the hours himself. What was happening to him? To them? He'd spent 2 years carefully reconstructing a life for himself and Dylan after Claire's death, focused solely on keeping his promises and surviving each day. He hadn't allowed himself to consider the possibility of letting someone new into that life, of opening himself to the vulnerability that came with caring. Yet here he was, watching the clock on days when Eleanor was due to visit, feeling a jolt of pleasure when her car pulled into the garage, finding reasons to extend their conversations after Dylan had gone to bed. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. One Saturday afternoon, when Eleanor had taken Dylan to a math lecture at the university, Jack found himself alone in the apartment, staring at the collection of books she'd brought for his son. Titles he couldn't begin to understand, concepts that were as foreign to him as another language. For the first time, he felt a twinge of inadequacy. What could he possibly offer someone like Eleanor Reed, with her wealth and education and worldliness? He was still pondering this question when his phone rang. It was Mrs. Henderson, an elderly client whose ancient Buick had been a regular visitor to the garage for years. "Jack, dear, I hate to bother you on a weekend, but my car's died again. I'm stranded at the supermarket, and it's starting to rain." Her voice wavered slightly. "I've got frozen things that won't last long in this heat." "I'll be right there," Jack promised, already reaching for his keys. Mrs. Henderson lived on a fixed income and could barely afford repairs, let alone a tow truck. He'd been fixing her car at cost for years, unable to turn away a woman who reminded him so much of the grandmother who had helped raise him after his mother left. By the time Jack arrived at the supermarket, the rain had become a downpour. Mrs. Henderson waited under the store's awning, a small figure dwarfed by her shopping bags. Jack parked and jogged over to her, already soaked to the skin. "Let's get your groceries in my truck first," he said, taking the heaviest bags from her. "Then I'll look at the car." "You're a good boy, Jack," Mrs. Henderson said, patting his arm. "Your father would be proud." They loaded her groceries into Jack's truck, then he turned his attention to the Buick. The problem was immediately apparent. A battery terminal had corroded completely through, preventing any current from flowing. It wasn't a complicated fix, but it would require parts he didn't have with him. "I'll need to tow it back to the garage," he told Mrs. Henderson, who was huddled in his truck's passenger seat. "I can drive you home now with your groceries, then bring the car over when it's fixed." "How much will it cost?" she asked, her voice small. "I'm a bit short this month with the new medication copay." Jack opened his mouth to tell her not to worry about it. He'd find a used terminal in his parts bin when another vehicle pulled into the parking lot. A familiar Audi. Eleanor. She parked beside them and emerged with an umbrella, making her way quickly to Jack's window. "Dylan saw Mrs. Henderson's car from the highway," she explained. "He was worried." Jack blinked rain from his eyes, surprised to see her. "Where is he?" "In my car, reading a book I bought him." Eleanor peered past Jack to smile at Mrs. Henderson. "Hello, I'm Eleanor, a friend of Jack and Dylan's." "Aren't you lovely?" Mrs. Henderson said, her face brightening. "So kind of you to stop." "What's the problem with the car?" Eleanor asked, turning back to Jack. "Corroded battery terminal. I'll need to tow it back to the garage," Jack explained. "I was just going to take Mrs. Henderson home with her groceries first." Eleanor nodded decisively. "I can drive Mrs. Henderson home while you tow the car. That way her frozen foods won't melt, and you can start working on it right away." Before Jack could respond, she had opened the passenger door and was helping Mrs. Henderson out, sheltering her under the umbrella. "Dylan and I would love some company if you don't mind," she said to the older woman. "He's just been to a fascinating lecture on applied mathematics, and he's bursting to tell someone all about it." Mrs. Henderson beamed. "Well, I don't know much about mathematics, but I'm an excellent listener." Jack watched as Eleanor transferred the groceries to her car, settled Mrs. Henderson in the passenger seat, and made sure Dylan was comfortable in the back. She moved with efficient grace, completely unfazed by the rain or the disruption to her plans. When she returned to Jack, her expression was serious. "She reminds you of someone, doesn't she?" Eleanor asked quietly. "That's why you drop everything to help her." Jack nodded, surprised by her perceptiveness. "My grandmother. She took care of me after my mom left. Same generation, same kind of quiet dignity." "I'll make sure she gets home safely," Eleanor promised. "Take your time with the car. We'll see you back at the garage." As he watched her drive away, Jack felt a surge of something he hadn't experienced in a long time. Partnership. The sense that he wasn't facing every challenge alone anymore. It was a dangerous feeling to get used to. When Jack arrived at the garage with Mrs. Henderson's car in tow, he was surprised to find Eleanor's Audi already parked outside. Inside, Dylan was perched on a stool, engrossed in a book, while Eleanor was sweeping the floor with the old broom Jack kept in the corner. "You don't have to do that," Jack said, hanging his dripping jacket on a hook. Eleanor looked up, a smudge of dust on her cheek. "Dylan was telling me about the lecture, and I just started tidying without thinking. Force of habit, I suppose." Force of habit? Jack raised an eyebrow. Somehow I doubt you spend much time sweeping floors. A strange expression crossed Eleanor's face. You'd be surprised, she said cryptically. Miss Henderson is home safe, groceries unpacked. She insisted I take a jar of her homemade pickles as thanks. She gestured to a jar on the counter. Apparently they're prize-winning. They are, Jack confirmed, smiling despite his confusion. She wins the county fair every year. He glanced at his son, who was still absorbed in his book. Dylan, can you go upstairs and change into dry clothes? You're going to catch cold. Once Dylan had disappeared up the stairs, Jack turned back to Eleanor. Thank you for helping with Mrs. Henderson. That was unexpected. Why? Eleanor set the broom aside. Because you think I'm some pampered princess who wouldn't deign to help an elderly woman with her groceries? The direct question caught Jack off guard. I don't know what to think about you most of the time, he admitted. You show up in our lives out of nowhere, knowing things about us you shouldn't know. You spend your evenings in a grimy garage helping an 8-year-old with math problems, when you could be, I don't know, attending galas or running your mysterious business. Nothing about this makes sense to me. Eleanor was quiet for a moment, her expression thoughtful. What if I told you that helping Dylan with his math problems, driving Mrs. Henderson home in the rain, having spaghetti dinner at your kitchen table, what if I told you these are the most meaningful hours of my week? I wouldn't believe you, Jack said honestly. No, I suppose you wouldn't, she sighed. Jack, I know I've been evasive about certain aspects of my life. There are reasons for that, good ones. But I hope you know that my interest in you and Dylan is genuine. There's no hidden agenda, no ulterior motive. Jack wanted to believe her. God, how he wanted to. But years of disappointment and struggle had taught him that nothing came without a price. Then why all the secrecy? Why not just tell me who you really are, what you really want? Because I'm afraid, Eleanor said simply. Afraid that once you know everything, you'll see me differently. That the person you've come to know over these weeks will disappear behind the label, the position, the assumptions. Try me, Jack challenged. I'm a pretty good judge of character. Eleanor looked as if she might say more, but the sound of Dylan's footsteps on the stairs interrupted them. The moment passed, the conversation suspended but not forgotten. The next day, Dylan's school called. He'd been caught correcting his math teacher on an advanced calculus problem. Not rudely, the principal hastened to add, but with a level of understanding that had left the teacher both impressed and concerned. We've always known Dylan was gifted, the principal said carefully, but this is beyond our usual acceleration protocols. He's working at a college level in mathematics, Mr. Donovan. We're not equipped to challenge him adequately. Jack listened with a mixture of pride and panic. Claire had always said Dylan would need specialized education eventually, but Jack had hoped they'd have more time before facing that challenge. The elite math programs in the area cost far more than the regular private school tuition he was already struggling to pay. What are you suggesting? Jack asked, dreading the answer. There's the Wellington Academy for Gifted Students, the principal said. They have a world-class mathematics program. But, he hesitated. But it's expensive, Jack finished for him. More expensive than we could possibly afford. There are scholarships, the principal offered. Dylan would certainly qualify academically, and occasionally private sponsors fund promising students. Private sponsors. The words echoed in Jack's mind long after the call ended. He had a sinking feeling he knew exactly who might step forward as a private sponsor if he mentioned this conversation to Eleanor. But the alternatives were equally unpalatable. Keep Dylan in a program that couldn't challenge him, watching his extraordinary gift languish for lack of proper nurturing, or swallow his pride and accept help that would feel too much like charity, creating a debt he could never repay? Claire would know what to do. She always had the clarity Jack lacked in these situations. But Claire was gone, and the weight of this decision rested solely on his shoulders. That evening, when Eleanor arrived at the garage, Jack was quieter than usual. Dylan, oblivious to his father's dilemma, chattered excitedly about a new mathematical concept he was exploring with Eleanor's guidance. Jack watched them together, seeing the same spark in both their eyes as they discussed theorems and proofs that might as well have been a foreign language to him. After Dylan went upstairs to finish his homework, Eleanor turned to Jack with a concerned expression. Something's bothering you. It wasn't a question, but a statement of fact. Jack had noticed this about her, the way she read his moods with unsettling accuracy. Dylan's school called today, he said finally. Apparently he's been showing off some of the advanced math you've been teaching him. Eleanor smiled slightly. Is that a problem? The problem is that he's now working at a level they can't accommodate, Jack explained, running a hand through his hair in frustration. They're suggesting a specialized academy for gifted students. Wellington, Eleanor said immediately. It's the best in the state. Jack's eyes narrowed. How did you know that's the one they recommended? It's the logical choice for a student of Dylan's caliber, Eleanor replied smoothly. Their mathematics program is exceptional. And exceptionally expensive, Jack added. The tuition is more than double what we're paying now. Eleanor was quiet for a moment, her expression unreadable. There are scholarships, she said finally. Dylan would certainly qualify. That's what the principal said. Jack paced the small office, unable to sit still with the tension coursing through him. He also mentioned private sponsors. Something flickered in Eleanor's eyes. Caution, perhaps, or calculation. That's also a possibility. Is it? Jack stopped pacing to face her directly. Would you happen to know any of these potential private sponsors, Eleanor? The challenge in his tone was unmistakable. Eleanor met his gaze steadily. If I did, she said carefully, would that be so terrible? To give a brilliant child the education he deserves? It would depend on the strings attached, Jack replied, on what's expected in return. A flash of hurt crossed Eleanor's face. You think I want something from you? That I've been spending time with you and Dylan as some kind of transaction? I don't know what to think, Jack admitted. That's the problem. You're still a mystery to me, Eleanor. You appear in our lives with your expensive car and your designer clothes, taking an interest in a struggling mechanic and his son. You know things about us you shouldn't know. You have connections and resources that make no sense for someone who just walked into my garage one day. Eleanor's composure cracked slightly. Is it so hard to believe that I might simply enjoy your company? That I might see in Dylan a mind worth nurturing? That I might find in you a man worth knowing? The raw emotion in her voice caught Jack off guard. Eleanor, no, she interrupted, standing up. I understand your suspicion. In your position, I'd probably feel the same way. But I had hoped that after all these weeks, you might have begun to trust me, at least a little. I want to, Jack said honestly. But every time I think we're getting closer to the truth, you change the subject or speak in riddles. If you want my trust, Eleanor, you need to earn it with honesty. Eleanor gathered her purse, her movements stiff with hurt pride. Perhaps you're right. Perhaps it's time for honesty. She paused at the office door. Dylan's birthday is next week. After the celebration, we should talk. Really talk. I'll answer your questions then. Before Jack could respond, she was gone, the sound of her car engine fading into the night. He stood in the empty office, wondering if he'd just made a terrible mistake by pushing too hard, too soon. Dylan's 9th birthday approached like a storm cloud on Jack's horizon. Previous celebrations had been modest affairs, limited by budget constraints and his own emotional capacity for joy. But this year felt different. Dylan had been dropping hints about a baseball glove for weeks, his eyes lighting up whenever they passed the sporting goods store window. Jack had been saving every spare dollar, but the numbers still fell short of the price tag attached to quality equipment. The gap between what he could provide and what his son deserved felt like a canyon he couldn't bridge. Pride warred with desperation as he considered asking Eleanor for help, knowing she had the means, but terrified of what that request might cost him in terms of dignity and independence. 3 days before Dylan's birthday, Jack was elbow deep in an engine when he heard the now familiar sound of Eleanor's Audi pulling into the garage. He hadn't seen her since their tense conversation about Wellington Academy, and he wasn't sure what to expect. Wiping his hands on a rag, he emerged from under the hood to find her standing by her car, expression unreadable. "Do you have a minute?" she asked, her tone more formal than usual. Jack nodded, leading her into the office and closing the door. "Look, about the other night, I have a proposal," Eleanor interrupted, placing a folder on the desk between them. "My company is sponsoring a youth mentorship program focused on automotive skills. We need someone to teach basic mechanics to teenagers interested in the field. The position pays well and would involve 2 evenings a week, 3 hours per session. Jack stared at the folder, suspicion immediately flaring. Your company, he repeated. The one you've never actually told me about. I'm in management, Eleanor said, the vague explanation he'd heard before. Business administration, primarily. And this company of yours just happens to need an auto mechanic right when I need extra cash for Dylan's birthday? Jack raised an eyebrow. Eleanor met his gaze directly. The need is genuine. The timing is convenient. Does it matter? It did matter, but Jack couldn't bring himself to refuse outright. Not when the alternative was disappointing his son on his birthday. When would I start? Next week. The first payment can be advanced immediately if you accept. Eleanor pushed the folder closer to him. All the details are in there. Jack took the folder, feeling as though he was crossing some invisible line. I'll think about it. Of course, Eleanor's expression softened slightly. Jack, I meant what I said about talking after Dylan's birthday. I know you have questions, and I promise to answer them then. But for now, can we just focus on making his day special? The sincerity in her voice was impossible to doubt. Whatever Eleanor's secrets, her affection for Dylan seemed genuine. Jack nodded slowly. All right, for Dylan's sake. Relief flickered across Eleanor's face. Thank you. I've been thinking about the party. If you're amenable, I have some ideas that might make it particularly memorable. Let me guess, Jack said, unable to keep a hint of dryness from his tone. You just happen to know a guy who specializes in 9th birthday parties? To his surprise, Eleanor laughed, a genuine sound that transformed her face. Not exactly, but I do know a fantastic bakery that makes custom cakes, and I have connections with the city's minor league baseball team that might be willing to donate some authentic merchandise for decorations. Despite his reservations, Jack found himself smiling. Dylan would love that. Then it's settled. Eleanor stood, her demeanor lighter now that the tension between them had eased somewhat. I'll handle the cake and decorations if you'll let me. You focus on finding that baseball glove he wants. I'm still not sure about this job offer, Jack warned. It feels too convenient. Think of it as fortunate timing rather than suspicious convenience, Eleanor suggested. But the choice is yours, Jack. It always has been. As she turned to leave, Jack found himself calling after her. Eleanor. She paused, looking back at him questioningly. Thank you for caring about Dylan's birthday. Something soft and vulnerable flickered in her eyes. It's my pleasure. Truly. The following days passed in a flurry of preparation. Jack accepted the teaching position after reviewing the details and finding everything in order. The program was legitimate, the pay generous, but not suspiciously so. The advance allowed him to purchase not only the baseball glove Dylan coveted, but also new shoes to replace the worn-out pair he'd been wearing, despite having outgrown them months ago. Eleanor was true to her word about the decorations. The morning of Dylan's birthday, she arrived at the garage with boxes of baseball-themed party supplies, a custom cake featuring Dylan's favorite team, and even authentic jerseys donated by the local minor league team. Jack watched in amazement as she transformed the garage into a baseball fan's dream, stringing pennants across the ceiling and arranging memorabilia with an artistic eye he wouldn't have expected from a corporate executive. How did you manage all this? He asked as she put the finishing touches on a display of baseball cards. Eleanor shrugged, a small smile playing at her lips. I told you, I have connections. Apparently, Jack muttered, but there was no real suspicion in his tone now, only gratitude. The party itself was a roaring success. Dylan's friends from school arrived wide-eyed at the transformation of the usually oil-stained garage. They played baseball-themed games Eleanor had organized, devoured the custom cake, and treated Dylan with newfound respect when they learned the jerseys on display had been signed by actual players. When it came time for gifts, Dylan opened each with genuine appreciation, thanking his friends for books, games, and small toys. But when Jack handed him the package containing the baseball glove, his son's face lit up with a joy so pure it made Jack's chest ache. Is it really? Dylan breathed, carefully unwrapping the package. When the leather glove emerged, he let out a whoop of delight that echoed through the garage. It's exactly the one I wanted. The same kind the real players use. He threw his arms around Jack's neck, squeezing tight. Thank you, Dad. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Jack held his son close, blinking back unexpected tears. Happy birthday, buddy. When Dylan finally disentangled himself, Eleanor stepped forward with a small, neatly wrapped package. I have something for you too, she said almost shyly. Dylan took the package with curiosity. Inside was a framed photograph of him and Jack working on a car together, their heads bent over an engine in identical poses of concentration. It was a moment captured with perfect timing, showing the connection between father and son in a way that words never could. Wow, Dylan breathed, running his fingers over the frame. This is so cool. When did you take this? Eleanor smiled. A few weeks ago. You were both so focused, you didn't even notice me with the camera. Dylan hugged her impulsively. It's perfect. Thank you, Eleanor. As Jack watched them together, he felt a complex mix of emotions. The photograph was beautiful, capturing a moment of connection he treasured with his son. But it also reminded him of how much about Eleanor remained unknown. How long had she been watching them before she officially entered their lives? And why? Later that night, after Dylan had fallen asleep clutching his new glove, Jack found Eleanor in the kitchen, washing the last of the party dishes despite his protests that she'd done more than enough already. We need to talk about the photograph, he said quietly, taking the frame from where Dylan had proudly displayed it on the bookshelf. Eleanor's hands stilled in the soapy water. I knew you'd ask about that. How long have you been watching us, Eleanor? Jack placed the photo on the counter between them. Why are you documenting our lives without permission? Eleanor dried her hands slowly, buying time. When she finally spoke, her words seemed carefully chosen. I was moved by your relationship with Dylan, the way you pour everything into being the father he needs. It inspired me. Photography is a hobby of mine, a way of preserving moments that might otherwise be lost to time. But her eyes avoided his while she spoke, and Jack noticed the way her fingers drummed against her thigh, that nervous tick he'd observed when she was hiding something. The explanation felt true but incomplete, like puzzle pieces that fit but left gaping holes in the bigger picture. There's more to it than that, Jack pressed. You've been in our lives for weeks now, Eleanor. You know almost everything about us, but I still know next to nothing about you. Who are you really? What do you want from us? Eleanor's composure cracked slightly, a flicker of vulnerability crossing her face. What I want, she began, then stopped, seeming to reconsider her words. I'm not here to hurt you or Dylan. I hope you believe that at least. I do, Jack admitted, but that doesn't answer my question. No, it doesn't. Eleanor sighed, leaning against the counter. You deserve the truth, Jack, all of it. But I'm afraid once you know, everything will change between us. It's already changing, Jack pointed out. Every day you keep secrets, every time you evade a direct question. It creates distance, not closeness. Eleanor was quiet for a long moment, her internal struggle visible on her face. Finally, she nodded. You're right. But this isn't a conversation for tonight, with Dylan asleep just down the hall and the excitement of his birthday still in the air. Tomorrow evening, I'll come by after Dylan's in bed and I'll tell you everything you want to know. Jack studied her, trying to gauge her sincerity. Promise me. No more evasions, no more half-truths. I promise. Eleanor's voice was soft but firm. Tomorrow you'll know everything. After she left, Jack sat alone in the kitchen for a long time, the framed photograph before him, wondering what revelations the next day would bring, and whether they would strengthen the bond that had been forming between them or shatter it beyond repair. The following evening arrived with agonizing slowness. Jack went through the motions of his day, fixing cars, helping Dylan with homework, preparing dinner, but his mind was fixed on the coming conversation with Eleanor. What secrets could be so significant that she feared revealing them would change everything between them? Dylan noticed his distraction during dinner. Dad, are you okay? You've been stirring your spaghetti for like 5 minutes without eating any. Jack forced a smile. Just thinking, buddy, how's the new glove working out? That was enough to launch Dylan into an enthusiastic description of how he'd been practicing catches in the backyard, successfully diverting his attention from Jack's preoccupation. After dinner, bath, and bedtime story, Dylan finally drifted off to sleep, still clutching the baseball glove he'd barely let out of his sight since the party. Jack had just settled on the couch with a cup of coffee when a soft knock came at the door. Eleanor stood on the threshold, looking more uncertain than he'd ever seen her. Gone was the polished executive in designer clothes. Tonight she wore jeans and a simple sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders instead of in its usual sleek style. "Come in," Jack said, stepping aside. Eleanor entered, her movements hesitant. "Is Dylan asleep?" "Out like a light. The party wore him out." An awkward silence fell between them. Jack gestured to the couch. "Coffee?" "Please." "Oh, yes." He poured her a cup, noting how her hands trembled slightly as she accepted it. Whatever she was about to reveal clearly cost her something in confidence. "So," Jack said, sitting across from her, "you promised me the truth." Eleanor took a deep breath as if steeling herself. "Before I start, I need you to understand something. Everything I've told you about myself, my past, my feelings, my interest in you and Dylan, all of that is genuine. The only things I've concealed are my full identity and the circumstances that led me to seek you out specifically." Jack nodded, encouraging her to continue. "My name is Eleanor Reed Westbrook," she began. "My father was Robert Westbrook, founder of Westbrook Industries." Jack's mind raced to place the name. Westbrook Industries, one of the largest manufacturing conglomerates in the country. The Westbrook Hotel where he'd first met Eleanor. The Westbrook Academy that Dylan attended. Suddenly, pieces began to fall into place with dizzying speed. "You're a Westbrook," he said slowly. "As in the Westbrook family." Eleanor nodded. "Since my father's death 4 years ago, I've been the CEO of Westbrook Industries. The company employs over 50,000 people across 12 states. Our annual revenue last year was just under $9 billion. Jack sat back, stunned by the scale of what she was revealing. "You're not just wealthy, you're one of the richest women in the country," Eleanor finished for him, her voice matter-of-fact. "Yes. And you've been spending your evenings eating spaghetti in my kitchen and helping my son with math homework." Jack shook his head, trying to reconcile this information with the woman he'd come to know. "Why? Why us?" Eleanor set her coffee cup down, her expression serious. "That's the more complicated part of the story. Do you remember when I asked you about Claire, about her work in mathematics?" Jack nodded, uncertainty growing. "What I told you was true. Claire was brilliant. Her paper on applied number theory was groundbreaking." Eleanor hesitated. "What I didn't tell you was that Westbrook Industries has a research division focused on advanced mathematical applications in manufacturing systems. Claire's work was directly relevant to a project we were developing." "You knew my wife professionally," Jack said slowly. "Is that what you're saying?" "Not personally, no, but our research team had been following her work. When she published her paper, my father's R&D director reached out to offer her a position with us, a very prestigious, very well-paid position." Eleanor met his gaze directly. She turned it down. Jack wasn't surprised. Claire had been passionate about pure mathematics, uninterested in its commercial applications. "That doesn't explain why you sought me out years after her death." "When my father died, I inherited not just his company, but his unfinished projects. One of those was the mathematical modeling system Claire's work would have accelerated." Eleanor's fingers drummed lightly against her knee. "As I was reviewing the file, I came across her name again, along with a note that she had declined our offer because she was expecting a child and wanted to focus on her family." Jack felt a pang at the memory. Claire had been offered several prestigious positions during her pregnancy, but had chosen to step back from academia to raise Dylan. It had been her choice, one he'd supported fully. "I was curious about the woman who would choose family over such an opportunity," Eleanor continued. "So I did some research. I learned about her death, about you, about Dylan, and then about 6 months ago, I saw Dylan's name on a list of scholarship recipients at Westbrook Academy." "You own the school," Jack realized aloud. "Of course you do." Eleanor nodded. "I review the scholarship program personally each year. When I saw Dylan's test scores, I was astonished. He has his mother's gift for mathematics, perhaps even beyond hers. The faculty evaluations described him as potentially one of the most brilliant mathematical minds of his generation." "That still doesn't explain why you inserted yourself into our lives," Jack pointed out, struggling to keep up with these revelations. I wanted to meet this extraordinary child, Eleanor admitted, and the father who was sacrificing everything to nurture his gift. Initially, I thought I might offer a more substantial scholarship, perhaps mentorship with our research team when he was older. She looked down at her hands. But then I saw you together one day when I was visiting the school. The way you listened to him, encouraged him, prioritized his needs above your own. It affected me deeply. Jack remembered the photograph from Dylan's birthday, the one that had captured their connection so perfectly. So you started following us. Not in a sinister way, Eleanor said quickly. I just observed, from a distance. I saw a single father working multiple jobs to keep his son in a school that could challenge him intellectually. I saw a boy with extraordinary potential who needed resources beyond what even the best scholarship could provide. And you decided to what? Swoop in and save along? Jack couldn't keep the edge from his voice. No, Eleanor's response was firm. I decided to meet you, to understand what kind of man would work himself to exhaustion, keeping a promise to his late wife. What I didn't expect was, she trailed off, color rising in her cheeks. Was what? Jack pressed. To like you, she said simply, to enjoy your company, to find myself looking forward to evenings in your garage more than board meetings in my corner office, to see in you qualities I've rarely encountered in the circles I typically move in, honesty, integrity, genuine care for others without expectation of return. Jack absorbed this, trying to reconcile the Eleanor he knew with the powerful CEO she was revealing herself to be. So, the escort job, the charity gala, that was all a setup to meet me? Eleanor nodded. I needed a reason to approach you that wouldn't immediately expose who I was. In my experience, once people know my wealth and position, authentic connection becomes nearly impossible. Everyone wants something, money, influence, connections. I wanted to know you, the real you, before my name got in the way. And all the help you've given us since then? The teaching job, Dylan's birthday party, the offers to pay for Wellington Academy? Was that guilt? Charity? Research funding for a potentially valuable mathematical mind? Jack couldn't keep the hurt from his voice. No, Eleanor said softly. It was care, for both of you. I won't apologize for having resources that could make your lives easier, Jack. But I will apologize for not being honest about who I was from the beginning. Jack stood, needing to move, to process this flood of information. Eleanor Westbrook, CEO of a multi-billion-dollar corporation. A woman who could buy and sell his garage 1,000 times over without noticing the expense. A woman who had entered their lives under false pretenses, however well-intentioned. I need time, he said finally. This is a lot to take in. Eleanor nodded, rising as well. I understand. For what it's worth, Jack, the person you've come to know these past weeks, that's the real me. Not the CEO, not the heiress, not the name on the building, just Eleanor. As she moved toward the door, Jack found himself asking the one question that still nagged at him. Why now? Why tell me everything tonight? Eleanor paused, her hand on the doorknob. Because I'm falling in love with you, she said quietly, and I couldn't let that happen with this lie between us. Before Jack could respond, she was gone, leaving him alone with a truth more complex and unsettling than any he could have imagined. Sleep eluded Jack that night. Her final words before leaving, that she was falling in love with him, echoed in his mind alongside the staggering revelations about her identity. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw the vulnerability in Eleanor's face as she finally shared her truth, contrasting sharply with the power her position represented. Billionaire CEO, heir to an industrial empire. A woman whose signature could change the fortunes of thousands of employees. The distance between their worlds seemed insurmountable in the darkness of his small apartment. What could a mechanic with oil-stained hands possibly offer someone who commanded boardrooms and charity galas? And beneath the practical concerns lay a deeper question that kept him staring at the ceiling until dawn. Was it possible to build something real from a beginning so tangled in secrets? Morning brought no clarity. Jack moved through his routine mechanically, making Dylan's breakfast, checking his homework, sending him off to school with a forced smile that his perceptive son immediately questioned. Are you okay, Dad? Dylan asked, backpack slung over one shoulder. You look like you didn't sleep. I'm fine, buddy, Jack assured him. Just thinking about some stuff for the garage. Dylan nodded, though his expression remained skeptical. Is Eleanor coming over today? She said she'd help me with my project for the competition. Jack hesitated. I'm not sure. She might be busy. How could he explain to his son that their friend was actually one of the most powerful businesswomen in the country? That the woman who helped him with math homework and made pancakes in their kitchen was wealthy beyond imagination? Can you call her? The competition's next week, and I really need her help with the probability calculations. Dylan's expression was so earnest that Jack felt his heart twist. I'll see what I can do, he promised, ruffling his son's hair. Now get going or you'll miss the bus. After Dylan left, Jack sat at the kitchen table, coffee growing cold in his mug, phone sitting untouched beside it. Should he call Eleanor? What would he even say? Thanks for finally being honest, but I have no idea where we go from here. The decision was made for him when his phone rang. Eleanor's name flashed on the screen. Jack? Her voice was hesitant when he answered. I wasn't sure you'd pick up. I almost didn't, he admitted. I understand. She paused. How are you doing? After everything? Jack laughed, a short, humorless sound. Honestly, I don't know. It's a lot to process. I know. Another pause. Dylan has his math competition next week. I promised to help him with the final preparations. I'll understand if you'd rather I didn't, but I don't want to let him down. Of course she remembered Dylan's competition. Of course she still wanted to help, even after laying bare her secrets and receiving no reassurance in return. It was so typical of the Eleanor he had come to know. Thoughtful, reliable, putting others' needs before her own comfort. He was asking about you this morning, Jack said. He's counting on your help. Then I'll be there, she said simply. Whatever time works for you. Jack hesitated, then made a decision. He'll be home from school at 4, but Eleanor, we still need to talk. Yes, we do. Relief colored her voice. Thank you for not shutting me out completely. It means more than you know. After they hung up, Jack sat for a long time, turning his phone over in his hands. Despite everything, he couldn't bring himself to push Eleanor away entirely. Not just because of Dylan's attachment to her, but because of his own. Whatever lies she had told, whatever secrets she had kept, the woman he had come to care for, perhaps even love, was real. The question was whether a relationship built on such an uneven foundation could ever truly work. The garage was busy that day, a blessing that kept Jack's mind occupied with transmissions and oil changes rather than billionaire CEOs and impossible relationships. By the time he closed up shop and headed upstairs, Dylan was already home from school, working on homework at the kitchen table. Dad, can I go to Jason's house on Saturday? Dylan asked as soon as Jack walked through the door. His dad got tickets to the baseball game, and he invited me to go with them. That sounds great, buddy, Jack said, grateful for the normalcy of the conversation. We'll make sure your homework's done before you go. It will be, Dylan promised. Is Eleanor still coming today? As if on cue, there was a knock at the door. Jack's heart rate accelerated as he went to answer it. Eleanor stood on the threshold, looking nothing like the powerful CEO she had revealed herself to be. She wore jeans and a simple blouse, her hair loose around her shoulders, her expression uncertain. Hi, she said softly. Hi, Jack replied, stepping aside to let her in. Dylan's been waiting for you. Eleanor! Dylan bounded over, math notebook in hand. I've been working on the Bayesian model you showed me, and I think I've figured out how to apply it to my project. Just like that, they fell into their familiar routine. Dylan explaining his ideas, Eleanor asking thoughtful questions and offering guidance, Jack preparing dinner in the background while listening to their conversation with equal parts pride and bewilderment. If he hadn't known the truth, he would never have guessed that the woman patiently explaining statistical concepts to his son could single-handedly influence global markets. Dinner was slightly awkward, with Jack quieter than usual and Eleanor careful not to push. Dylan, however, was oblivious to the tension, chattering excitedly about his project and the upcoming competition. If I win the regional, I get to go to the state finals, he explained. And if I win there, the nationals are in Chicago. Have you ever been to Chicago, Eleanor? Several times, she said with a smile. Our company has offices there. Your company? What do you do? Dylan asked innocently. Jack and Eleanor exchanged a glance. I work in business management, she said after a moment. It's mostly boring adult stuff. Dad says there's no such thing as boring work if you love what you do, Dylan replied, unknowingly echoing one of Jack's frequent sayings. Your dad is a very wise man, Eleanor said, looking at Jack with such genuine warmth that he had to look away. After dinner, Dylan returned to his homework, leaving Jack and Eleanor alone in the kitchen. The silence between them stretched uncomfortably until Eleanor finally broke it. He's going to win that competition, she said. His understanding of probability theory is remarkable. He gets that from Claire, Jack said automatically. And from you, Eleanor countered. Your ability to break down complex problems into solvable parts. He does the same thing with mathematics. That's not just inherited genius. That's learned methodology. Jack looked at her, surprised by the observation. I never thought of it that way. I know. Eleanor's smile was sad. You sell yourself short, Jack. Always have, I suspect. Another silence fell, this one even more loaded than the last. We should talk, Jack said finally. Really talk, but not here. Not with Dylan in the next room. Eleanor nodded. Where then? Jack considered for a moment. There's a park near the garage. Dylan has a sleepover at his friend's house tomorrow night. We could meet there. I'll be there, Eleanor promised. Whatever time works for you. When she left that evening, Jack watched her drive away, the taillights of her expensive car disappearing into the darkness. Tomorrow they would talk, really talk, and he would have to decide whether the connection they had formed was strong enough to overcome the chasm of differences between them. The following evening was unseasonably warm for early fall, the kind of night that hinted at summer's reluctance to fully surrender to autumn. Jack arrived at the park before Eleanor, choosing a bench overlooking the small lake. The setting sun cast golden light across the water, painting the scene with a beauty that seemed at odds with his tumultuous emotions. He heard her approach before he saw her, the soft crunch of gravel under careful footsteps. When he turned, Eleanor stood a few feet away, silhouetted against the sunset. She dressed simply again, jeans and a light sweater, as if trying to emphasize that she was just Eleanor, not Eleanor Westbrook. Hi, she said, the word carrying more weight than its simplicity suggested. Hi, Jack replied, gesturing to the space beside him. Thanks for coming. Eleanor sat, leaving careful distance between them. For a moment, they both watched the sunset in silence. Dylan got off to his sleepover okay? She asked finally. Jack nodded. He was so excited he barely said goodbye. His friend's dad is taking them to a baseball game tomorrow. Another silence fell, more comfortable than the last. Jack glanced at Eleanor's profile, gilded by the fading sunlight. Even now, knowing who she truly was, he found it hard to reconcile the woman beside him with the powerful CEO she had described. So, he said finally, Eleanor Westbrook. She turned to face him. Yes. CEO of Westbrook Industries. Yes. Billionaire, philanthropist, corporate powerhouse. A flicker of discomfort crossed her face. Those are labels, Jack. They're not who I am. Aren't they? Jack challenged gently. They're part of you, just like being a mechanic is part of me. A part, yes, but not the whole. Eleanor's gaze was steady. When I'm with you and Dylan, those labels fall away. I'm just me. In a way I can't be anywhere else. Jack considered this. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Why the elaborate setup with the escort job, the pretense of not knowing who we were? Eleanor looked out over the lake. I told you the truth about that. Once people know who I am, what I have, authentic connection becomes nearly impossible. Everyone wants something, funding, connections, status by association. I wanted to know the real you, not the version of you that might emerge if you knew who I was from the start. And did you get to know the real me? I believe I did. Her voice softened. A man of extraordinary integrity. A father who would sacrifice anything for his son. Someone who fixes things that others would discard, whether they're cars or people or situations. Jack felt warmth spread through his chest at her words, at the genuine admiration in her voice. I've been thinking about what you said, he admitted, about falling in love with me. Eleanor's breath caught audibly. I shouldn't have blurted that out. It wasn't fair to put that on you. especially after everything else I'd revealed. Maybe not, Jack agreed. But was it true? Yes. The single word held such conviction that Jack couldn't doubt it. I didn't expect it, didn't plan for it, but somewhere between Dylan's math problems and Mrs. Henderson's groceries and late-night conversations in your garage, it happened. Why? The question had been haunting him. You could have anyone, literally anyone. Why would you choose a struggling mechanic with a second-hand garage and more responsibilities than resources? Eleanor's expression turned fierce. Because you see me, Jack. Not the money, not the company, not the influence, just me. Do you have any idea how rare that is in my world? How precious? She shifted closer on the bench, her voice growing more intense. You think I could have anyone, but that's not true. I could have anyone who wants what I represent. But someone who wants me for myself? That's infinitely more rare. Jack absorbed this perspective, seeing their situation through her eyes for perhaps the first time. I never thought of it that way. Of course not. You're too busy seeing all the reasons we shouldn't work to consider the reasons we might. Eleanor's hand moved as if to reach for his, then retreated. I know there are practical challenges, significant ones, but if we care about each other, if what we've built these past months is real, don't we owe it to ourselves to at least treat him all? The vulnerability in her question touched something deep in Jack's heart. What would that even look like? Your world and mine are so different. They don't have to be separate worlds, Eleanor said thoughtfully. They could be complementary. My resources, your practicality, my business connections, your mechanical expertise, my academic knowledge, your intuitive intelligence. And what about Dylan? Jack asked, voicing his deepest concern. He's already lost one parent. I can't let him get attached to someone else who might disappear. I would never voluntarily leave Dylan's life, Eleanor said firmly. Whether things work between us romantically or not, I care about him too much to abandon him. The conviction in her voice was reassuring, but Jack still had doubts. And what happens when the board of your company discovers you're dating a mechanic? When the society pages get hold of the story? When your world crashes into mine with all its expectations and judgments? Eleanor smiled slightly. You might be surprised. I'm not exactly the darling of high society as it is, too focused on business, too outspoken about economic inequality, too uninterested in the social climbing that occupies so much of that world. She looked at him directly. As for the board, they serve at my pleasure, not the other way around. My father left me controlling interest in the company. I answer to shareholders about business decisions, not personal ones. It won't be easy, Jack warned. People will talk, make assumptions. People always talk, Eleanor shrugged. The question is whether what we could have together is worth weathering a little gossip. As the last rays of sunlight disappeared below the horizon, Jack found himself facing the core question. Was he willing to take this risk? To open his heart not just to the possibility of love again, but to the complications that would inevitably come with loving someone from such a different world. Before he could answer, his phone rang. An unknown number. Frowning, he answered. Is this Jack Donovan? A male voice asked. Yes, who's this? This is Dr. Mercer from Memorial Hospital. I'm calling about your son, Dylan. Jack's blood turned to ice. What happened? Is he okay? There's been an accident. Dylan and another boy were hit by a car while crossing the street outside the baseball stadium. He's in surgery now. The world seemed to tilt beneath Jack's feet. How bad is it? He's stable but has a broken leg and possible internal injuries. We'll know more after surgery. Can you come to the hospital immediately? I'm on my way. Jack hung up, already on his feet, keys in hand. Jack, what's wrong? Eleanor's face was etched with concern. Dylan's been hit by a car. He's in surgery at Memorial. Jack's voice sounded distant to his own ears, shock setting in. I have to go. I'm coming with you, Eleanor said immediately, fishing her own keys from her purse. You're in no condition to drive. My car's closer. Jack nodded numbly, following her to the parking lot. The Audi's engine purred to life, and Eleanor drove with focused precision, navigating traffic with a calm efficiency that contrasted sharply with the panic coursing through Jack's veins. He's going to be okay, she said, reaching across to squeeze his hand briefly. Dylan's strong. Jack nodded, unable to form words around the fear constricting his throat. His son, his brilliant, kind, wonderful son, was in surgery after being hit by a car. Everything else, his conversation with Eleanor, their complicated relationship, the differences in their worlds, all of it faded to insignificance in the face of this primal terror. The hospital emergency entrance was brightly lit against the gathering darkness. Eleanor pulled up directly in front, ignoring the no parking signs. "Go," she said. "I'll find parking and meet you inside." Jack sprinted through the automatic doors, approaching the information desk with barely contained panic. "My son was brought in, Dylan Donovan. Car accident. They said he's in surgery." The receptionist typed quickly. "Yes, he's in operating room 3. Take the elevator to the second floor, turn right, and the surgical waiting area is at the end of the hall. The doctor will find you there." Jack followed the directions, finding himself in a sterile waiting room with uncomfortable chairs and outdated magazines. A TV mounted in the corner played a news channel with the sound muted. He paced the small space, unable to sit still with adrenaline and fear coursing through his system. Minutes later, Eleanor appeared, slightly breathless, as if she'd been running. "Any news?" Jack shook his head. "Still in surgery. They said the doctor would find me here when it's done." Eleanor nodded, moving to the reception desk. Jack watched as she spoke quietly to the woman behind the counter, who immediately straightened and began typing with renewed purpose. After a brief conversation, Eleanor returned to Jack's side. "They're checking for updates," she said. "The head of surgery will be informed that we're waiting." Under normal circumstances, Jack might have remarked on the immediate response her subtle authority had generated. Now he was simply grateful for any advantage that might bring news of Dylan faster. "What happened?" Eleanor asked gently. "Did they tell you?" "Just that he and another boy were hit crossing the street outside the stadium." Jack ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of helplessness. "They were supposed to be with Jason's dad. Where was he? Why were they crossing alone?" "We'll get answers," Eleanor promised. "But right now, let's focus on Dylan getting through surgery." Jack nodded, resuming his pacing. Eleanor sat quietly, her presence a steady anchor in the storm of his fear. Occasionally, she would check her phone, typing brief messages before returning her attention to Jack. An hour passed with excruciating slowness. Then 2. Finally, a doctor in surgical scrubs appeared at the waiting room entrance. "Family of Dylan Donovan?" Jack rushed forward. "I'm his father. How is he?" The doctor, middle-aged, with kind eyes and a tired face, gestured to the chairs. "Let's sit down, Mr. Donovan." Jack felt his knees weaken. Bad news. It had to be bad news if the doctor wanted him to sit down. "Dylan's out of surgery," the doctor said once they were seated, Eleanor at Jack's side. "The procedure went well. He had a compound fracture of the tibia, that's the larger bone in the lower leg, which we've set and stabilized with pins. He also had some internal bleeding from a lacerated spleen, which we've repaired." "But he's going to be okay?" Jack asked, barely breathing. "Barring complications, yes. He's young and healthy, which gives him excellent chances for a full recovery." The doctor's expression softened. "He's in recovery now. You can see him in about 30 minutes, once he's settled in the pediatric ICU. He'll be groggy from anesthesia, but he should recognize you." Relief washed over Jack with such force that he felt lightheaded. "Thank you, doctor. Thank you so much." The doctor nodded. "The police are here as well. They'd like to speak with you about the accident when you're ready." "Of course," Jack said, though his only concern was seeing Dylan. After the doctor left, Jack turned to find Eleanor watching him with relieved tears in her eyes. Without thinking, he pulled her into a tight embrace, needing to share this moment of pure gratitude with someone who understood what Dylan meant to him. "He's going to be okay," he whispered against her hair. "Yes, he is," she agreed, her voice thick with emotion. "He's a fighter, just like his dad." They separated reluctantly when a police officer approached, and introducing himself as Sergeant Wilson. "Mr. Donovan, I understand your son was involved in the accident on Stadium Boulevard." Jack nodded. "The doctor said he's going to be okay, but I don't know what happened. They were supposed to be with an adult." The officer consulted his notes. According to witnesses, the boys were with an adult male who was walking several yards ahead of them, possibly on his phone. The boys stopped to look at something in a store window, then ran to catch up. They crossed against the light, and the driver didn't see them in time. Jack felt sick. Dylan had been injured because another parent wasn't paying attention. The other boy, Jason, is he okay? Minor injuries, already released to his parents. The officer hesitated. Mr. Peterson, Jason's father, has been charged with negligent supervision. He admits he was on the phone with work and didn't realize the boys weren't right behind him. Jack nodded, absorbing this information. He was angry, yes, but also aware that his primary focus needed to be Dylan's recovery, not assigning blame. Is there anything else you need from me right now, officer? I'd really like to see my son. That's all for now. We'll need a formal statement later, but it can wait. The officer handed Jack his card, a turon. Call if you have any questions. After the officer left, a nurse appeared to escort them to the pediatric ICU. In the elevator, Eleanor spoke quietly. Jack, I've taken the liberty of calling in a pediatric orthopedic specialist. Dr. Reeves is the best in the state for childhood fractures. She'll consult on Dylan's case tomorrow morning. Jack looked at her, a mixture of gratitude and wariness in his expression. You didn't have to do that. I know, but if it were my child, I'd want the best care possible. Eleanor's voice was gentle but firm. This isn't about showing off what I can do, Jack. It's about making sure Dylan recovers completely. After a moment, Jack nodded. Thank you. The pediatric ICU was quieter than Jack expected, the soft beeping of monitors and hushed voices of staff creating a cocoon of focused care. Dylan lay in a bed that seemed too large for his small frame, his leg elevated and encased in a temporary splint. An IV dripped fluid into his arm, and monitors tracked his vital signs with steady rhythms. Jack approached the bed slowly, heart constricting at the sight of his son's pale face. Dylan's eyes were closed, dark lashes stark against his skin. A bruise was forming along his jawline, and a small cut had been neatly stitched above his right eyebrow. Dylan, Jack said softly, taking his son's hand. It's Dad. I'm here, buddy. Dylan's eyelids fluttered, then opened slightly. Dad? His voice was raspy from the breathing tube used during surgery. I'm right here. Jack squeezed his hand gently. You're going to be okay. Dylan blinked groggily. My leg hurts. I know, buddy. You broke it in the accident, but the doctors fixed it, and it's going to heal. Dylan's eyes drifted closed again, then reopened with slightly more awareness. Eleanor? He murmured, spotting her standing a few feet behind Jack. I'm here, Dylan. She moved closer, her smile gentle. Just resting your eyes for the math competition, I see. A ghost of a smile touched Dylan's lips before he drifted back to sleep, the medication pulling him under. That's normal, the nurse assured them. He'll be in and out for the next few hours. The anesthesia takes time to wear off completely. Jack nodded, not taking his eyes off his son. I'm staying with him. Of course, the nurse said. There's a recliner that converts to a cot. Only one parent can stay overnight in the ICU, though, she added, glancing at Eleanor. I'm not, Eleanor began, then stopped herself. I understand. I'll come back in the morning. The nurse left them alone with the sleeping Dylan. Jack continued to hold his son's hand, watching the steady rise and fall of his chest with each breath. You should go home, get some rest, he said to Eleanor without looking up. There's nothing you can do here tonight. Are you sure? She asked. I don't want to leave you alone. I'm not alone, Jack said simply. I'm with Dylan. Eleanor nodded, understanding. I'll bring you a change of clothes in the morning. Is there anything else you need? Jack finally looked up at her, seeing the genuine concern in her eyes. In the chaos and fear of the past few hours, something had shifted between them. The complications of their different worlds seemed trivial compared to what truly mattered. Dylan's health, their shared care for him, the connection that had brought them to this moment together. Thank you, he said, the words encompassing far more than her offer of clothes. For everything tonight. Eleanor smiled softly. Get some rest if you can. I'll be back first thing tomorrow. After she left, Jack settled into the recliner beside Dylan's bed, still holding his son's hand. The events of the day swirled in his mind. The sunset conversation with Eleanor, the shocking phone call, the terror of not knowing if Dylan would be all right. He was emotionally exhausted, yet sleep seemed impossible with his son lying injured before him, and he must have dozed eventually, because he woke to sunlight filtering through the blinds and a gentle hand on his shoulder. Eleanor stood beside him, a duffel bag in hand. "Good morning," she said softly. "How is he?" Jack stretched, wincing at the stiffness in his neck from the awkward sleeping position. "Better, I think. He woke up a couple times during the night, more lucid each time." As if on cue, Dylan stirred, his eyes opening more clearly than they had the night before. "Dad, is it morning?" "It sure is, buddy." Jack leaned forward, relief washing through him at the recognition in his son's eyes. "How are you feeling?" "My leg really hurts," Dylan admitted. "And I'm thirsty." Jack helped him sip water through a straw, careful not to disturb the IV line. "Eleanor's here too," Jack said, nodding toward her. Dylan's face brightened slightly. "Hi, Eleanor. Did you see my cool cast?" "Well, it's not a real cast yet, but it will be." "I did see it," Eleanor smiled, moving closer. "Very impressive. All the best mathematicians have broken bones at some point, you know. It's practically a rite of passage." Dylan giggled, then winced as the movement jostled his leg. "Really?" "Absolutely. It gives you time to think about complex problems without distractions." Eleanor's tone was light, but Jack could see the relief in her eyes at Dylan's lucidity. A nurse entered, followed by a doctor Jack hadn't met the night before. "Good morning, Dylan. I'm Dr. Reeves, and I'll be taking care of your leg." Jack recognized the name, the specialist Eleanor had called in. Dr. Reeves was a woman in her 40s with an air of quiet confidence. "I've reviewed your scans and the surgical report," she said, examining Dylan's leg with gentle hands. "The break was clean, and Dr. Mercer did an excellent job with the initial repair. We'll put on a proper cast today, and then talk about your recovery plan." "Will I still be able to go to my math competition next week?" Dylan asked anxiously. Dr. Reeves smiled. "That depends on how you're feeling, but I don't see why not, as long as someone can help you get around. Your brain wasn't injured, just your leg." Dylan looked relieved. "Dad, I can still go. Eleanor, you'll still help me prepare, right?" Eleanor glanced at Jack as if seeking permission. He nodded slightly. "Of course I will," she assured Dylan. "We'll work around your recovery schedule." The morning passed in a blur of medical consultations, medication adjustments, and the application of a proper cast, bright blue at Dylan's request. By afternoon, he had been moved from the ICU to a regular pediatric room, a significant step toward recovery. Throughout it all, Eleanor remained present but unobtrusive, handling paperwork when Jack was busy with Dylan, making calls to ensure the best care, even arranging for lunch to be delivered from a nearby restaurant when hospital food proved unappetizing. Jack watched her quiet efficiency with growing appreciation, recognizing that she was using her resources and influence not to show off, but simply to help. When Dylan dozed off after lunch, Jack found Eleanor in the hallway, speaking quietly on her phone. As he approached, she ended the call. "Everything okay?" he asked. She nodded. "Just rearranging some meetings. I've cleared my schedule for the next few days." "You don't have to do that," Jack said automatically. "Your company can function without me for a while," Eleanor finished. "That's what competent executive teams are for." She paused, studying his face. "Unless you'd rather I didn't stay, I don't want to intrude." Jack realized with sudden clarity that he very much wanted her to stay. Not just for the practical help she provided, but for her steadying presence, her quiet strength, the way she cared for Dylan as if he were her own. "No," he said. "I'd like you to stay." "We both would." Relief flickered across her face. "Thank you." She hesitated, then added, "There's something else. I've arranged for a private room for Dylan. It'll be ready in about an hour." Jack frowned. "Eleanor, before you object," she interrupted gently, "consider what it will mean for his recovery. A quieter environment, more space for you to stay comfortably with him. Better rest for faster healing." She met his gaze directly. "This isn't charity, Jack. It's practical care for someone who matters deeply to me." Jack studied her face, seeing the sincerity there. This wasn't about showing off her wealth or creating obligation. It was simply Eleanor using the resources she had to help the people she cared about, exactly as she would expect him to do if the situation were reversed. "Okay," he said finally. "Thank you." Her smile was worth any pride he might have had to swallow. By evening, Dylan was settled in a spacious private room with a view of the hospital gardens. The space included a proper bed for Jack, a small sitting area, and even a desk where Dylan could work on his math competition project once he felt up to it. The difference in comfort level was immediately apparent, with Dylan falling into a peaceful sleep almost as soon as he was transferred. Jack sat in a comfortable armchair beside the bed, watching his son sleep. Eleanor had gone to pick up more of Dylan's things from the apartment, insisting that Jack stay at the hospital in case Dylan woke. As he sat in the quiet room, Jack reflected on the past 24 hours. The revelation of Eleanor's true identity, their interrupted conversation about a possible future together, the terrifying accident, all of it seemed to have stripped away the complications and distractions, leaving only what truly mattered. Eleanor Westbrook was still the same woman who had helped Dylan with his homework, who had swept his garage floor without being asked, who had treated Mrs. Henderson with respect and kindness. Her wealth and position hadn't changed who she was at her core. They were simply tools she used, aspects of her life that informed her perspective but didn't define her value. And who was he to judge her for concealing parts of herself when they first met? Hadn't he done the same in his own way, holding back his grief, his fears, his growing feelings for her until he felt safe enough to reveal them? The door opened quietly, and Eleanor entered carrying a duffel bag. "He's still sleeping?" she whispered. Jack nodded. "The new pain medication seems to be working better." Eleanor set the bag down and moved to stand beside him, looking at Dylan's peaceful face. "He looks so much like you when he sleeps." "Everyone says he looks like Claire," Jack said, surprised. "He has her coloring, yes, but that expression, that's all you." Eleanor's voice was soft with affection. The determination even in rest. Jack found himself reaching for her hand without conscious thought. She interlaced her fingers with his, the simple contact providing more comfort than words could express. "We never finished our conversation," he said quietly. "At the park." Eleanor squeezed his hand. "It doesn't matter now. What matters is Dylan's recovery." "It does matter," Jack insisted gently. "Because what I realized when I got that call about Dylan, when I thought I might lose him, is that life is too short and too precious to let fear make our decisions for us." Eleanor turned to look at him, hope dawning in her eyes. "I've been afraid," Jack admitted, "afraid of letting someone new into our lives, afraid of the differences between us, afraid of what loving you might mean for Dylan and me." He took a deep breath. "But the real fear should be wasting the chance for happiness, because it doesn't come in the package we expected." "Jack," Eleanor whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know how this works," he continued. "I don't know how we bridge our different worlds or what challenges we'll face. But I do know that when I thought my world was falling apart last night, you were the person I wanted beside me, the person I trusted with my son's well-being, the person whose strength helped me find my own." Eleanor's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" "I'm saying I love you too," Jack said simply, "and I'm willing to figure out the rest as we go if you are." Eleanor's smile was like sunrise after the longest night. "I am. God, Jack, I am." As she leaned forward to rest her forehead against his, Dylan's voice came sleepily from the bed. "About time, Dad." They both turned, startled, to find Dylan watching them through half-open eyes, a small smile on his face. "How long have you been awake?" Jack asked, feeling his cheeks warm. "Long enough," Dylan yawned. "Can Eleanor stay with us now? Not just at the hospital, but like forever?" The directness of the question made both adults laugh softly. "It's a bit more complicated than that, buddy," Jack said. "Why?" Dylan asked with a child's perfect logic. "You love her, she loves you. I like having her around. Seems simple to me." Eleanor moved to sit on the edge of Dylan's bed. "Your dad's right that it's a little complicated, Dylan. I have a different life in some ways, a big company to run, responsibilities that take time. And your dad has the garage, and you have school. Putting all that together takes some figuring out." Dylan considered this. "But you're both really smart, and you tell me all the time that any problem can be solved if you break it down into smaller parts." Jack and Eleanor exchanged a look of amused surprise at having his own wisdom reflected back to him. "He has a point," Eleanor said. "We are pretty smart." "And determined," Jack added. "And when we care about something, we don't give up easily." "So you'll try?" Dylan asked, looking between them. Because I really want Eleanor to stay. She makes you smile more, Dad, and she knows about math stuff that even my teachers don't know. Jack felt his heart swell with love for this perceptive, remarkable child who had already endured so much loss yet remained open to new connections. Yes, buddy, we'll try. Good, Dylan said decisively, because I already told all my friends that Eleanor is like my bonus mom. The term bonus mom caught both adults by surprise. Eleanor's eyes widened, and Jack saw in them a mixture of joy and uncertainty, the fear of presuming too much, of stepping into a role that had belonged to Claire. Dylan, Jack began carefully, Eleanor isn't trying to replace your mom. No one could ever do that. I know that, Dad, Dylan said with the slight exasperation of a child stating the obvious. Mom will always be my mom, but Eleanor is different. She's like extra, a bonus. That's why I call her that. Eleanor's expression softened into wonder. I'd be honored to be your bonus mom, Dylan, if that's what you want. It is, Dylan said firmly. Then ever practical, he added, can we order pizza for dinner? Hospital food tastes like cardboard. The simple request broke the emotional tension, making both adults laugh. I think that can be arranged, Eleanor said, reaching for her phone. Any special requests? As Eleanor called in their order, Jack watched her with his son, seeing the easy affection between them, the natural way they had formed their own bond independent of his relationship with either of them. It wouldn't always be this simple, he knew. There would be adjustments, compromises, perhaps even painful moments of reckoning with their different backgrounds. But in this moment, watching the two people he loved most in the world discuss the merits of various pizza toppings with mock seriousness, Jack felt something he hadn't experienced in a very long time. Hope, not just for survival or making it through another day, but for genuine happiness, for a future filled with possibility rather than merely obligation. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The mechanic, the CEO, and the remarkable boy who had brought them into each other's lives. Different worlds, perhaps, but a single heart connecting them all. Outside the hospital window, the first stars of evening appeared in the darkening sky. Jack remembered his father's pocket watch, still in the pocket of the jacket Eleanor had brought from the apartment. He reached for it, feeling the familiar weight in his palm. Time, which had been his enemy for so long, counting down Claire's final days, measuring the hours between bill payments, ticking away the childhood Dylan deserved, but Jack couldn't fully provide. Now felt like a friend again. Time to heal, time to build something new, time to love. He slipped the watch back into his pocket, a reminder of where he'd come from and the values that had guided him through his darkest days. Those values hadn't changed, and neither had he, not in any way that mattered. He was still Jack Donovan, mechanic and father, a man who fixed broken things and kept his promises. But now he was also a man who had found the courage to reach for happiness again, to believe that the future could hold more than mere survival, and that, perhaps, was the greatest repair of all, the mending of a heart he'd thought would always remain broken.